I have never been one for ghost stories. I always chalked them up to superstition or overactive imaginations. But what happened to me and my wife at Palo Duro Canyon last fall changed everything. I haven't told many people about it, mainly because I don't want to relive it. But maybe writing it down will help. We had been planning the trip for months. Rachel, my wife, had been dying to take the RV out for a weekend, and the weather was perfect. Palo Duro Canyon was supposed to be breathtaking that time of year. Crisp autumn air, burnt orange foliage, and just enough chill at night to make campfires worthwhile. We pulled into the campground late Friday afternoon. The sun was dipping below the canyon rim, casting long shadows over the rugged terrain. There weren't many other campers around, just a few scattered RVs and tents in the distance. It was peaceful, almost too peaceful. The kind of quiet that makes you hear your own heartbeat. Rachel and I set up our site, grilled some burgers, and sat by the fire as the stars blinked into the darkening sky. The wind whispered through the canyon walls, carrying a faint, distant echo that seemed to shift direction every few moments. Rachel joked that it sounded like someone humming. I brushed it off, told her it was probably just the wind playing tricks. By midnight, we crawled into the RV, both exhausted from the drive and a little buzzed from the wine. Rachel fell asleep almost instantly. I lay awake, listening to the sounds outside. The crackling fire had dwindled to glowing embers, and the hum of the wind was now punctuated by something else. Footsteps. At first, I thought it was an animal. Maybe a coyote or a deer sniffing around the site. But the sound was too deliberate, too rhythmic. It circled the RV, slow and steady. Gravel crunched under each step, one after another, like someone pacing. I didn't want to wake Rachel. She had a tendency to panic, and I figured it would pass. But after 15 minutes of that slow, relentless circling, I couldn't take it anymore. I quietly slid out of bed, grabbed the flashlight, and peeked through the small window by the kitchenette. Nothing. The firelight barely reached the edge of the RV, but beyond that, there was just darkness. I opened the door, stepped outside, and shined the flashlight around the site. The beam cut through the night, illuminating the trees and the empty picnic table. Still, nothing. The footsteps had stopped. I stood there for a few minutes, waiting for something, anything to emerge from the shadows. But the only sound was the wind scraping against the canyon walls. Finally, I locked the RV and climbed back into bed, telling myself it was just my imagination. I woke up to Rachel screaming. She was standing by the RV door, her hand trembling as she pointed at the window. The glass was smeared with handprints, long, pale smudges that stretched across the entire pane. Dozens of them. Some small, like a child's. Others larger, more defined. But they were everywhere, crisscrossing in patterns that made no sense. Did you do this? Rachel's voice was barely above a whisper, but I could hear the terror in it. Why would I do that? I snapped, stepping closer to inspect the prints. They weren't ours. The smears were greasy, almost translucent, as if the hands that made them were damp. I pressed my palm against one, measuring the size. It was larger than mine by at least an inch. I checked the door. Locked. Same with the windows. There was no sign of forced entry. Whoever had left those prints had done it from the outside, but there were no footprints in the dirt beneath the window. Nothing. Rachel wanted to leave immediately. I can't blame her. But I convinced her to stay, at least until sunrise. We spent the next few hours huddled together, every creak of the RV making us jump. When the first light bled over the canyon, I stepped outside again. The handprints were gone. Not just faded or washed away. Gone. As if they had never been there at all. Rachel swore up and down that she hadn't imagined them, and I knew better than to doubt her. We packed up and left that morning, cutting our trip short. Weeks passed, and we tried to forget about it. But Palo Duro stayed with us. Rachel refused to camp anymore, and I started triple-checking the locks at night. Sometimes, when the wind picks up, I hear footsteps outside our house. I tell myself it's nothing. But some nights, when I look out the window, I swear I see faint smudges on the glass. They're not there in the morning. I didn't sleep that night. The wind picked up, howling through the mountains, but it wasn't just the wind anymore. That damn whistle. It cut through the night like a blade, sharp and deliberate, as if whoever or whatever was doing it was right behind me, breathing down my neck. My eyes flicked to every shadow in the distance, but all I saw were the jagged silhouettes of rocks, cast long and distorted in the moonlight. The air felt alive. Too alive, like it was watching, waiting. Every gust of wind made the hairs on my arms stand straight. I tried to tell myself it was just a bird, or maybe a breeze playing tricks on me, but I couldn't shake the feeling. The next morning, I was too exhausted to even process what had happened. But when I unzipped my tent, my stomach lurched in terror. I didn't see it right away. I should have. But when I stepped outside, there was something wrong, something off, about the way the dirt around my campsite had shifted. The ground was clawed up, deep gouges like animal tracks, but they were too large, too uneven. The dirt wasn't just scratched, it was ripped open, as though something huge, something feral, had scraped its way across the earth. The pattern was all wrong. These weren't the usual marks you'd see from a coyote or a bear. These were jagged, erratic, unnatural, like a hand. No. Claws had torn into the earth itself, digging deep into the soil. And as I stood there, I could feel something shift in the air. The temperature dropping, the tension thick and suffocating. But it wasn't just the ground that unnerved me. I turned, and my stomach sank like I'd been punched in the gut. My RV was parked nearby, and it was covered. At first, I thought it was some kind of shadow or dirt, but then I saw the truth. The sides of the RV were marked, covered in claw marks. Deep slashing gashes that went through the metal, tearing at the surface like some animal had used its talons to scratch at it for hours. No animal could have done that. No coyote. No bear. And I knew, even then, that whatever had made those marks was still out there, watching me, waiting. I stood frozen for a moment, staring at those scratches, my heart hammering in my chest. But something was off about the air. It was too still, too quiet. Not even the wind stirred. It was as if the desert had fallen silent in the face of whatever was stalking me. I wanted to move, to run, but my feet wouldn't cooperate. I was rooted to the spot, the adrenaline and fear coursing through me, making my head spin. Then, it came again. That whistle. But this time, it was different. This time, it was close. I whipped around, my heart thumping in my throat, the air thick with a sickening sense of dread. There was nothing there. Just the same jagged rocks and dead brush, the same oppressive desert stretching on for miles. But I could feel it. Feel something moving. Something unnatural. Just outside. The edge of my vision. A flicker in the shadows. I couldn't see it, but I could feel it. I don't know how much time passed. Could have been minutes, could have been hours. But I couldn't stand there anymore. I grabbed my backpack, threw everything into the car, and started the engine. I was panicked, my hands shaking, the cold sweat sticking to my back. I didn't care about the damage to the RV or my gear. I needed to leave. But as I pulled away from the campsite, something caught my eye in the rearview mirror. A figure. It was standing in the distance, just on the edge of the road, too far to make out clearly. But there was no mistaking the shape of it. Tall, gaunt, with long, thin limbs that seemed to stretch unnaturally. Its head was tilted to the side, like it was studying me, watching me. Its body barely moved in the windless air, as though it was waiting. I slammed my foot down on the gas, the engine roaring as I sped down the road. The image of that thing seared into my mind. I tried to convince myself I was just imagining things. Maybe it was just some weird trick of the light, the kind of thing your mind plays on you when you're alone in the wilderness for too long. But the further I drove, the more I realized that whatever I had seen was real. And it was still following me. I could feel it. Every nerve in my body screaming. A constant weight on my chest. I didn't stop driving for hours. Not until the first light of dawn broke over the horizon and the oppressive, choking darkness began to lift. I finally pulled over at a small diner on the outskirts of the park, my hands shaking as I reached for the door handle. When I stepped out, the feeling of being watched didn't go away. It was like the air itself had shifted, thickened, as if the desert was holding its breath. I didn't tell anyone what had happened. The rangers at the entrance asked if everything had been okay, but I just nodded, muttering something about rough weather and needing a break. The whistle, the scratches, that thing, I didn't want to talk about it. I couldn't. They wouldn't believe me. But I wasn't the only one who heard it. Weeks later, I found out through a series of whispers and rumors from other campers who had been in Big Bend that same night. They had heard the same damn whistle, the same scratching, the same feeling of being hunted. Some of them hadn't stuck around long enough to see the damage I had witnessed on my RV. Others had. But they had all said the same thing. They saw something out there. Something tall and strange. Something unnatural. Park rangers were baffled. They found no evidence of any wildlife in the area. No tracks, no clues. Just the claw marks. Just the strange, eerie whistling in the night. They claimed it was just a freak occurrence, a fluke. But I knew better. I had felt it. I had seen it. And I knew it was still out there. That night, when I closed my eyes, I could still hear that whistle. Clear as ever. Too close. Too real. I didn't dare look out the window. I couldn't. I could still feel the weight of those eyes on me, the oppressive feeling that had followed me from the desert. And somewhere, out there, in the silent, endless dark, something was waiting for me to come back. Something was watching, listening for that familiar, terrified sound. But this time, I wouldn't make the mistake of running. Next time, it would find me. I never used to believe in the supernatural. Not really. I'd laugh at ghost stories, shake my head at those YouTube videos of shadowy figures caught on grainy security cameras. I always figured there was a logical explanation for everything, until last October. It was supposed to be a quiet weekend. I took my RV out to Sam Houston National Forest, away from the noise, away from work and responsibilities. Just me, a stack of books, and 2 cases of beer. I even left my phone in the glove compartment, turned off. I told myself I wanted peace, but if I'm honest, I needed the isolation. Life had been heavy lately, and I thought maybe a few days alone in the woods would help me clear my head. The spot I found was perfect. Remote, tucked about 25 miles north of Huntsville, past the usual trails. I had to navigate some winding dirt roads to get there, but by the time I pulled into the clearing, the sky was blushing orange with the sunset. Tall pines loomed around me, the kind that seemed to watch you when the wind blew just right. It felt secluded, exactly what I wanted. I set up camp, unfolded my lawn chair, and watched the sky darken. The fire crackled beside me, and for the first time in weeks, I felt like I could breathe. I should have left after that first night. I slept deeply at first, wrapped in the quiet hum of the RV heater. But around 3 a.m., something woke me. I couldn't place what it was. I just sat up in bed, feeling like someone had whispered my name. The RV was still, and outside the window, the trees swayed gently under the moonlight. I shook it off as a dream, grabbed a drink of water from the kitchenette, and lay back down. That's when I heard it. Soft. Distant at first. Like the wind through the trees. But it wasn't the wind. Wind doesn't whisper in circles around an RV. It was faint, just beyond the edge of hearing, but unmistakable. The soft cadence of voices. I froze, straining to make out the words, but they were too quiet. Just a murmur, moving around the RV. I told myself it was nothing. Maybe another camper somewhere nearby. Maybe a trick of the wind. But there was no one else out there. I forced myself to lie down, pulling the blanket up to my chin like a kid hiding from the monsters under the bed. I don't remember falling asleep, but the next thing I knew, the sun was pouring through the small window above me, and everything felt normal again. Still, I couldn't shake the unease. I spent the day hiking along the trails, pushing the night from my mind. By noon, I almost convinced myself it was just my imagination. Almost. That night, the whispers came back. Louder this time. I woke up, heart racing, and sat perfectly still in the dark. The voices were right outside the RV, moving from window to window. They sounded like children, giggling, murmuring just below their breath. I sat there for nearly an hour, too afraid to move. I kept expecting to see faces press against the fogged glass, but nothing appeared. The whispers faded just before dawn. I told myself I'd imagined it. I was wrong. The next night, things escalated. I woke at 3:13 a.m. I know because I glanced at the small clock on the stove as I sat up. The RV felt colder than usual, like someone had left the door open, but it was locked tight. And then I saw them. Handprints. Tiny, child-sized handprints trailing across the fogged glass of the windshield. I stared at them, breath shallow, heart hammering against my ribs. I hadn't moved the RV since I parked. No one had been out there. And yet, there they were, clear as day. I grabbed my flashlight, flicking it on with trembling fingers, and scanned the inside of the RV. Nothing. I cracked open the door, the cold air biting at my skin as I shone the light around the clearing. The ground was soft from the dew, but there were no footprints. No signs that anyone had been near the RV. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. The following day, I debated leaving, but something kept me there. Call it pride or curiosity. I convinced myself to stay just one more night. I shouldn't have. I fell asleep around midnight, fully clothed with the flashlight beside me. I told myself I wasn't scared, but I was. The whispers started right on time, just after 3 a.m. Only this time, they didn't stay outside. I woke to the sound of soft giggles inside the RV. I shot up, flashlight shaking in my grip as I swept it across the small space. The kitchenette, the door, the narrow bathroom, and then I saw the prints. Not just on the windshield, on the inside. They trailed along the glass, small and delicate, like someone had pressed their hands there while I was sleeping. I packed up at dawn. I didn't eat, didn't drink my usual morning coffee. I just drove, eyes darting to the mirrors every few seconds, half expecting to see something crouched in the back seat. I didn't stop until I hit Houston. I told myself I would forget about it, that I would laugh it off in a few months. But I haven't been able to. Because last night, when I walked to my truck to grab something, I noticed the faint trace of handprints on the driver's side window. And I haven't been back to Sam Houston National Forest since. I have never been one for ghost stories. I always chalked them up to superstition or overactive imaginations. But what happened to me and my wife at Palo Duro Canyon last fall changed everything. I haven't told many people about it, mainly because I don't want to relive it. But maybe writing it down will help. We had been planning the trip for months. Rachel, my wife, had been dying to take the RV out for a weekend, and the weather was perfect. Palo Duro Canyon was supposed to be breathtaking that time of year. Crisp autumn air, burnt orange foliage, and just enough chill at night to make campfires worthwhile. We pulled into the campground late Friday afternoon. The sun was dipping below the canyon rim, casting long shadows over the rugged terrain. There weren't many other campers around, just a few scattered RVs and tents in the distance. It was peaceful, almost too peaceful. The kind of quiet that makes you hear your own heartbeat. Rachel and I set up our site, grilled some burgers, and sat by the fire as the stars blinked into the darkening sky. The wind whispered through the canyon walls, carrying a faint, distant echo that seemed to shift direction every few moments. Rachel joked that it sounded like someone humming. I brushed it off, told her it was probably just the wind playing tricks. By midnight, we crawled into the RV, both exhausted from the drive and a little buzzed from the wine. Rachel fell asleep almost instantly. I lay awake, listening to the sounds outside. The crackling fire had dwindled to glowing embers, and the hum of the wind was now punctuated by something else. Footsteps. At first, I thought it was an animal. Maybe a coyote or a deer sniffing around the site. But the sound was too deliberate, too rhythmic. It circled the RV, slow and steady. Gravel crunched under each step, one after another, like someone pacing. I didn't want to wake Rachel. She had a tendency to panic, and I figured it would pass. But after 15 minutes of that slow, relentless circling, I couldn't take it anymore. I quietly slid out of bed, grabbed the flashlight, and peeked through the small window by the kitchenette. Nothing. The firelight barely reached the edge of the RV. But beyond that, there was just darkness. I opened the door, stepped outside, and shined the flashlight around the site. The beam cut through the night, illuminating the trees and the empty picnic table. Still, nothing. The footsteps had stopped. I stood there for a few minutes, waiting for something, anything to emerge from the shadows. But the only sound was the wind scraping against the canyon walls. Finally, I locked the RV and climbed back into bed, telling myself it was just my imagination. I woke up to Rachel screaming. She was standing by the RV door, her hand trembling as she pointed at the window. The glass was smeared with handprints, long, pale smudges that stretched across the entire pane. Dozens of them. Some small, like a child's. Others larger, more defined. But they were everywhere, crisscrossing in patterns that made no sense. "Did you do this?" Rachel's voice was barely above a whisper, but I could hear the terror in it. "Why would I do that?" I snapped, stepping closer to inspect the prints. They weren't ours. The smears were greasy, almost translucent, as if the hands that made them were damp. I pressed my palm against one, measuring the size. It was larger than mine by at least an inch. I checked the door. Locked. Same with the windows. There was no sign of forced entry. Whoever had left those prints had done it from the outside, but there were no footprints in the dirt beneath the window. Nothing. Rachel wanted to leave immediately. I can't blame her. But I convinced her to stay, at least until sunrise. We spent the next few hours huddled together, every creak of the RV making us jump. When the first light bled over the canyon, I stepped outside again. The handprints were gone. Not just faded or washed away. Gone. As if they had never been there at all. Rachel swore up and down that she hadn't imagined them, and I knew better than to doubt her. We packed up and left that morning, cutting our trip short. Weeks passed, and we tried to forget about it. But Palo Duro stayed with us. Rachel refused to camp anymore, and I started triple-checking the locks at night. Sometimes, when the wind picks up, I hear footsteps outside our house. I tell myself it's nothing. But some nights, when I look out the window, I swear I see faint smudges on the glass. They're not there in the morning. It was July 2020 when I pulled into the RV park just outside Amarillo, Texas. The world was in chaos, but here, in this tiny forgotten corner, it felt like time had stopped. Or perhaps it had been abandoned altogether. The park wasn't much. A handful of RVs scattered unevenly, their owners likely drawn by the low fees and the promise of quiet. The air was heavy with humidity, the remnants of a recent storm clinging to every surface. Thunder still grumbled in the distance, a low, menacing growl that never seemed to fade. The office/diner sat near the park's entrance, its faded sign barely legible. Rosa's Diner. The paint peeled like old scabs, and the windows reflected nothing but the encroaching night. Something about the place immediately felt off, though I couldn't pinpoint why. Maybe it was the way the light flickered inside, or how the shadows didn't seem to follow the natural rules of movement. I parked my RV at the far end of the lot, away from the others. Solitude had been my goal for this trip, after all. As I settled in, I noticed an odd silence around me. Not the peaceful quiet of nature, but a suffocating stillness. No crickets, no distant hum of highway traffic. Just the sound of my own breathing and the faint tapping of rain dripping from the RV's roof. An hour or so later, hunger got the better of me. I wasn't in the mood to cook, and the thought of a greasy burger from the diner didn't sound half bad. Grabbing my wallet, I stepped outside and immediately regretted it. The air felt wrong. It pressed against my skin like a weighted blanket, damp and electric. The storm was gone, but the sky was unnaturally dark. No stars, no moon, just an oppressive black void that swallowed everything. I hesitated, scanning the empty lot before forcing myself toward the diner. The closer I got, the worse the place looked. The neon "Open" sign buzzed weakly, casting a sickly green glow over the cracked pavement. Inside, I could see a single figure moving. A waitress. She seemed to glide more than walk. Her movements too smooth, too precise. My instincts screamed at me to turn around, but I ignored them. Hunger, or maybe stubborn curiosity, pushed me forward. When I stepped inside, the first thing I noticed was the smell. Not the warm, greasy aroma of diner food, but something cold, metallic. The kind of smell you would find in a hospital morgue or a room that hadn't been aired out in decades. "Welcome to Rosa's," the waitress said, her voice smooth and oddly melodic. She was young, maybe mid-20s, with a sharp bob of black hair and a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. She wore a vintage-style uniform, pristine and out of place in such a run-down building. I glanced around. The diner was empty except for her. The counter stools were torn, the booth stained, and the floor bore the grime of countless forgotten footsteps. Yet, she looked immaculate. "What can I get you?" she asked, sliding a laminated menu in front of me. Her hand brushed mine, and it was ice cold. Not cool, not clammy. Cold. Like touching a metal pole in winter. "A burger and fries," I muttered, trying not to stare. Coming right up. She moved to the kitchen, and I watched her. Something about the way she walked, floated, set my teeth on edge. Her footsteps made no sound on the old tile floor. I shook it off, telling myself I was imagining things. The stress of the pandemic, the isolation of the road. It was messing with my head. But when she returned with my plate, I couldn't ignore it any longer. The food looked perfect. Too perfect. The burger was glossy, the fries golden and crisp, like something out of a commercial. But the smell was all wrong. No savory aroma. Just that same cold metallic scent from earlier. "You're not eating," she said, tilting her head like a curious bird. Her smile was wider now, stretching just a little too far. I am not that hungry after all," I lied, pushing the plate away. Her expression didn't change, but the air around me grew heavier. It felt like the walls were closing in, the shadows deepening, stretching toward me. "You should eat," she insisted, her voice no longer melodic but sharp, almost a growl. I stood abruptly, mumbling an excuse about needing to get back to my RV. Her eyes followed me, unblinking as I stumbled out the door. Back in my RV, I locked the door and shut the blinds, heart pounding. I tried to rationalize what I'd just experienced, but my thoughts were a jumbled mess. Then, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. The diner. From my window, I could see it clearly. The neon sign was off now, the building completely dark. But what chilled me to the core was the realization that there was no power line running to it. The diner shouldn't have had electricity. I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her face, pale, smiling, and wrong. My heart raced as I replayed the events, trying to make sense of them. My brain screamed at me to leave, to drive away and never look back. But my body felt frozen, as if some unseen force rooted me to that spot. Around 3 a.m., I heard it. A faint tapping on the RV door. I shot up in bed, my throat dry and my skin damp with sweat. At first, I thought it might be the wind or a stray branch, but the sound was too deliberate. Tap, tap, tap. A rhythm, slow and steady. For a moment, I didn't move. I couldn't. The silence outside was absolute, swallowing everything except that infernal tapping. Gathering my courage, I crept to the door, careful not to make a sound. My hands trembled as I peeked through the small window. No one was there. The lot was empty. The shadows of the other RVs stretching unnaturally long under a light that didn't seem to have a source. I let out a shaky breath and backed away, telling myself it was just my imagination. But as I turned, my blood turned to ice. The tapping started again. This time, on the side window. I whipped around, and for the briefest moment I saw her, the waitress. Standing just outside, her face pressed against the glass, her lips stretched into that grotesque smile. Her eyes were wrong, glassy and lifeless, yet locked onto mine. I stumbled back, knocking over a chair. By the time I looked again, she was gone. Panic surged through me. I grabbed my keys, ready to start the engine and get the hell out of there. But when I opened the blinds to check outside again, my heart nearly stopped. The diner was lit up, bright, garish neon spilling into the night like a beacon. The windows glowed with an eerie, pulsating light, and inside I could see movement. Shadows, dozens of them, shifting and writhing like a mass of bodies crammed together. I blinked, and the shadows were gone. The diner looked empty again, but the light remained, cold and unwavering. I couldn't stay. Grabbing my keys, I flung open the door and bolted for the driver's seat. The engine sputtered to life, and I slammed my foot on the gas, peeling out of the lot so fast I nearly lost control. The road stretched ahead, endless and dark. My hands gripped the wheels so tightly they ached. I kept glancing in the rearview mirror, expecting to see her face. But all I saw was the diner, its glowing sign shrinking into the distance. Or so I thought. After what felt like an hour of driving, I saw it again. Rosa's Diner. The same flickering neon sign, the same dilapidated building, sitting just off the road like it had been waiting for me. No, I whispered, my voice trembling. No, no, no. I hit the gas harder, speeding past it. But my stomach dropped when, 5 minutes later, it appeared again. It didn't make sense. I hadn't turned around. The road was straight and unbroken. Yet, there it was. The third time I saw it, I slammed on the brakes and skidded to a stop. The RV shuddered, the engine wheezing as I sat there, staring at the diner. My breath came in short, shallow gasps. The air inside the RV felt thick, suffocating. Then, I saw her. The waitress stood in the middle of the road, her figure illuminated by my headlights. She wasn't smiling anymore. Her face was twisted in a grotesque mask of rage. Her eyes black pits that seemed to pull the light from the world around her. I couldn't move. Her mouth opened, impossibly wide, as if she were screaming, but no sound came out. Instead, the air seemed to vibrate, a low hum that grew louder and louder until it felt like my skull would split open. I slammed the RV into reverse, tires screeching as I backed away. But as I looked behind me, I realized it didn't matter. The diner was there too, surrounded. No matter which direction I turned, there it was. Rosa's Diner, glowing and eternal, a nightmare made real. The shadows in the windows moved again, pressing against the glass like they were trying to escape, or trying to get to me. The hum grew louder, deafening now, and I felt something cold and sharp brush against my neck. I whipped around, but the RV was empty, or so I thought, until I saw the condensation forming on the inside of the windows. Words. Stay for dinner. I don't remember much after that. I must have blacked out, because the next thing I knew, I was waking up in my RV parked on the side of a highway. The sun was rising, and the diner was gone. At least I thought it was. When I looked at my hands, they were stained with grease and something darker. Blood. And on the passenger seat was a plate, a burger and fries. The smell was cold and metallic. I stared at the plate for what felt like hours. The burger looked wrong, too perfect, like a prop from a staged photograph. The fries were cold, congealed in a shiny layer of grease. But the worst part was the blood. It pooled under the plate, sticky and vibrant, dripping slowly onto the seat beneath it. My stomach churned. I threw the door open and stumbled out of the RV, gasping for air. The highway stretched empty in both directions, nothing but asphalt and barren plains. The diner was gone, but its presence lingered, pressing down on me like an invisible weight. I tried to piece together what had happened. Had I imagined it? A hallucination? A nightmare that somehow bled into reality? But the blood on my hands and the plate in the RV told a different story. I needed to get out of there. The RV sputtered reluctantly to life, and I drove, aimless and frantic, until I saw the first sign of civilization. A gas station, I pulled in, my hands shaking as I stumbled inside. The clerk, a middle-aged man with a cigarette dangling from his lips, glanced up from his magazine. "You look like you've seen a ghost," he said with a smirk, but his expression shifted when he saw my face. "Are you okay?" he asked, his tone serious now. I don't know," I stammered. "There was a diner, Rosa's diner. It's back that way." "Do you know it?" His face went pale. The cigarette fell from his lips. "Rosas?" he repeated, his voice barely above a whisper. "You've got to be kidding me." I shook my head. I don't know how to explain it. Something happened there. Something... "You shouldn't have stopped," he cut in, his eyes darting around as if he expected someone or something to be listening. "Rosa's burned down years ago. A fire. Killed everyone inside. No one's been near that place since, but I was just there." I insisted. "I saw it. I talked to the waitress. She..." He held up a hand, his face a mask of fear. "Don't say any more. Just leave. Get as far away from here as you can." "But leave!" he barked, his voice trembling. I stumbled back, the weight of his words sinking in. My heart pounded as I returned to the RV, my thoughts racing. If the diner burned down, what had I seen? Who, or what, was the waitress? I didn't wait to find out. I drove for hours, putting as much distance as I could between myself and that cursed stretch of highway. But even as the miles passed, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. A week later, I was back home, trying to put it all behind me. I scrubbed the RV clean, desperate to erase any trace of that night. But the nightmares didn't stop. Every night I saw her, the waitress standing at the foot of my bed, her lifeless eyes boring into mine. And every morning I woke up to the smell of grease and blood. I tried everything, therapy, sleep aids, even moving, but it didn't matter. She followed me. Then, one night, I heard it again. Tap, tap, tap. On my bedroom window. When I looked, she was there, smiling. This time, I didn't scream. I didn't run. I just stared, paralyzed as she raised one hand and pointed at the door. A sound came from behind me, a low hum, like before. And then, I smelled it. Burgers. Fries. When I turned, my heart stopped. My living room had changed. The furniture was gone, replaced with red vinyl booths and a linoleum floor. A flickering neon sign buzzed above, casting everything in an eerie glow. Rosa's diner. The waitress was behind the counter now, watching me. Her smile widened as she slid a plate toward me. "Dinner's served," she said, her voice hollow, echoing in the empty space. The shadows began to move again, creeping closer, and I knew I was never leaving.